Good afternoon. My name is David Godfrey, and I'm a senior attorney to the American Bar Association Commission on Law and Aging and an advisor to the ABA Senior Lawyers Division. We're here this afternoon to talk about the movie I Care a Lot, which is an entertaining movie about a criminal who becomes a guardian, not a guardian who becomes a criminal. If you look at it, she really had criminal intent all along. The movie and reality, I have a disconnect because the due process protections that normally happen in adult guardianship, I didn't see in the movie. It was entertaining. I kind of enjoyed it, but I was also quite shocked by some of the things that happened there. I think it's important to just to note that in most states, in most situations, the actions of guardians, the actions of the courts, and the actions of the attorneys are quite different from what you see in the movie. In fact, the vast majority of guardians, family guardians, professional guardians, public guardians, are primarily focused on the health and well-being of the individual that the court has asked them to protect, and the courts are generally very conscientious about making sure that the persons that they take under guardianship are appropriately there and that the guardians are doing the work that they're supposed to do. If there's a state that has finds that they have a weakness in their guardianship laws, the Uniform Law Commission has a Uniform Guardianship, Conservatorship, and Other Protective Proceedings Act, which is a great model and has a lot of great protections and things in it that if it were the law in the states and the courts were practicing in that way, the outcome of the movie would be a whole lot different. And there's also a lot of great resources on the American Bar Association website, both with the Senior Lawyers Division and with the Commission on Law and Aging. Joining me today is Karen Campbell, a public guardian in the state of Florida and also a private guardian in Florida. Karen, what did you think of the movie?
I thought it was entertaining. I asked my sister to watch it, and she's probably my biggest fan, and she often she thinks that I'm helping people. That's what she thinks I do. And so she called me after the house sale, and if anybody hasn't seen it, this conversation will be a spoiler alert. But she called me and she said, "I can't believe that's what you do," and we don't. Guardians are there to help take care of people. For the most part, my colleagues, certainly myself, our motivation is to not to do no harm, is to protect the well-being of the individual. And the thing that there were a couple of things that I saw in the movie that were glaring inaccuracies based on my own practice, David. I thought about the fact that this guardian went into her actions doing what she wanted to do, how she felt, whatever she felt, how she could make the most money, basically.
Hmm.
And but what I find is I am governed by state statutes, state standards, and I also run my practice according to the National Guardianship Association's standards of practice. And that guardian must not have known any of those things existed. Now, as you said, guardianship is state specific, so and somebody watching this may not have the same types of oversight that my state has. But when I tell you, I couldn't do half the things that she did. We wouldn't have been able to knock on her door and say we had emergency guardianship without a court hearing. We wouldn't have been able to isolate her from family and friends. That was totally wrong. Um, we wouldn't have been able to move her from her home to an assisted living facility unless it was for her good, and we'd have to demonstrate that. And all of those things really boils down to the principles that guardians use to make decisions. Um, the National Guardianship Association describes them as the principle of self-determination and the principle of substituted judgment. Both of those mean that Jennifer would have been in the driver's seat. She would have been the one to say, I would prefer to stay home. And in this particular case, resources weren't an issue. So home care could have been brought in if she truly were incapacitated. So there were many things in that movie that I thought were entertaining. Um, and I couldn't wait until the end of the movie because I wanted to see justice done. So I was glad about that. But it's unfortunate that entertainment probably shed a negative light on a really worthwhile occupation and profession.
And also joining us is Katherine Seal, a private practitioner from Colorado. Catherine, what did you think?
But I come at this from 25 years in guardianship as an attorney who dislikes guardianship more and more the more I practice. The more I realize that least restrictive alternative should always be explored, or less restrictive alternative, because the closer I get to the age of people under guardianship, the less I want to be under guardianship. And I also come at it from the viewpoint that I have a lot in common with some of the critics of guardianship, and actually count some of them as my friends. I dialogue whenever I can with people from those organizations because it's useful to me. And those of us who can agree to disagree can have constructive conversations if we're both willing to admit that the system is flawed but necessary. And if you work in a system that is this important, but strips people of important rights, the system has to be designed with due process in mind. And among the reforms, first off, the movie was a caricature of the worst abuses, but it is likely that in every state, don't mean to pick on people from the country, but a rural jurisdiction where the court doesn't see contested guardianships all that often, that at least one of the issues as portrayed in the case could come up. So even an American Bar Association has statistics on the fact that no matter how much you reform your statute, sometimes in practice, that's not what you see. So you can have the best statute, but if the court's not going to follow it, then it doesn't help. You don't have the protections. So with those things in mind, first off, Colorado is under the last version of the Uniform Guardianship Act. And among the most important protections were, yes, you can have an emergency guardianship ex parte, but for no more than 60 days. And then you have to go into court and prove the incapacity. And under Colorado's version, you don't have a automatic right to counsel unless there's an emergency guardian appointed. Then you have a mandatory right to counsel. One of the questions is then, do you have to take the counsel courts appointed, or do you have the right to select your own counsel? We have no rule on it, but generally what happens is the court-appointed counsel will step aside if the individual wants their own counsel. Hopefully they've chosen somebody who's skilled in the area. But having counsel is really important in that process. The importance, not just of the right to counsel, but also the right to participate. Under the uniform laws, both versions, the only time the individual can be not present at the hearing, first for an emergency, there has to be a true bona fide emergency, or at a permanent, there has to be a reason to excuse somebody. And usually that's more than they will get upset. It's usually something to do with their physical condition. And you have to ask for that and get an order to excuse the respondent from appearing at the hearing. And it is the responsibility of the petitioner to do that. There's always a concern for abuse if the fiduciary who is going to be compensated has the right to petition for their appointment. So I point that out as a concern. I'm just running through my notes here. Visitation is an issue that frequently comes up. And some states have actually gone so far as to make it very clear that you cannot terminate the right to visit. Some states don't have specific rules or statutes on it, but if somebody is being denied access, it is likely that they will be able to be heard on that. And frankly, there are times when a professional fiduciary, in my experience, will side with one faction of a family over another and will use their authority to make it more difficult for the faction that they don't side with to spend time with the person. And I have seen that, which is why I'm not always in favor. I'm in favor of good professionals, but I'm not in favor of professionals in general. one of the things that was illustrated in this movie, and which was also apparent in the Las Vegas cases, was the familiarity of the judge with the professional. And this is one thing that judges in probate courts who are hearing these cases need to think about, is the fact that they may put more credence in the statements of the professional guardian than the family because of their familiarity with the professional guardian. And also, you will see that family members that try to intervene pro se often don't follow procedure, and they're highly emotional. So they aren't always tactful. And there was a part of this film that involved a son who'd been denied the right to visit, who kind of went berserk when he wasn't allowed to see his mother. And that can happen. People are very distressed about the idea that their parent is in their last years and they might be denied just a few precious moments to spend with them. That may be the last opportunity. So visitation is a hot button, and it's something that if you are going to deny somebody the right to see an individual, there ought to be a good reason why. I mean, certainly if there's a concern, you might need supervised visitation, but no visitation is always a problem. Another thing, and this is, I had to laugh when I saw it, I never will go into court and tell a judge the guardianship should not have been granted. You know, he said, basically the judge was asked, you're telling me I made a mistake. You're not in a good position if you tell a judge they made a mistake. You are better off with either there's information you didn't have, or there's a changed circumstance. And normally I do a lot of guardianship termination, restoration of rights for individuals who don't fit the criteria. And we never worry about the fact that maybe it shouldn't have been, that guardian shouldn't have been appointed in the first place. We get the medical evaluation and the data to show that they don't meet the standard today. And we go into court on today, they don't meet the standard. And under the uniform law, Colorado's version, if you ask for the guardianship to be terminated, the court has to review the evidence under the same standard as the initial appointment. So you are far more successful with new information than you are with telling the judge. I mean, that's an appeal process. That's not going to the same court. Two more things. Our statute doesn't allow a professional guardian to be handled both the person and the money unless the court finds good cause to do so. And that is really important. The check and balance system, if you have professionals, to have a different person handling the care as to handling the money is can't be stressed enough. And then the last thing, there was a valuable property that the guardian was gleeful about, wasn't on any inventory. So they were free to do what they want with it. Frankly, this is a problem. If someone has letters, and in Colorado, that would be conservatorship, and they use those letters to close an account, and they don't disclose those funds, it's hard to make them accountable for those funds. So if you don't reflect all the assets on the inventory, you run the risk that an unscrupulous person could, in fact, convert that property to their own uses.
Yeah. Time to commit a felony. And the movie is full of felonies and kind of interesting, but I don't, and as you say, it reflects the worst of what happens in the worst cases, not the norm of what happens in the vast majority of cases. And there is room for improvement in the system. I'm glad that the movie has stimulated a lot of conversation and discussion about the subject of adult guardianship, but please don't view the movie as what routinely happens day after day. It isn't.
One last thought, what it should stir is a discussion about, Should I have powers of attorney, or should my financial assets be in a trust? Should I have some plan in place in case I decline in capacity so that I've chosen who is going to be in charge and maybe set up the guidelines for them to manage?
Yeah. Yeah, we urge people to have, contact. The number one way of preventing bad things from happening is to have contact with family members, friends, loved ones, trusted advisors. There's a plot twist in the movie where she didn't have contact with family members for an interesting reason, but she could have had other professions. She could have had professionals in her life, uh, lawyers and social workers and better trusted healthcare advisors that could have prevented a lot of the bad things that happened from happening.
David, I think it's important too that we remember that the ABA has a number of places we can go for resources if you're interested in guardianship, and even the alternatives to guardianship that Catherine was mentioning.
Mhm.
The Senior Lawyers Division Guardianship Committee is developing some materials for Older Americans Month, where we will talk about some of those alternatives. And there was a webinar in the fall from the Senior Lawyers Division. And of course, the ABA's Commission on Law and Aging has a wealth of resources, ton of resources on the ABA's website dealing with these subjects.
Right. Well, thank you, Karen and Catherine, for joining us in the conversation this afternoon.
You're welcome.
It was fun.
All right.